for inviting me. I'm hoping that this is going to work, and just be patient with me. I'm very grateful for you inviting me again to speak. And I'm going to talk about wind power and other renewables and their effect on electricity. I like to start with a quotation. And I'm now struggling because, oh, right. I've got, can you see the quotation, Nahid? Is that, you can see? Yeah, okay. So this, I like to start with a quote. This is from a French writer, poet, but also a pilot, a famous pilot. He was shot down in the Second World War in 1944, and he's written some wonderful books and wonderful poetry, and he's said some very wise things. And this quotation is that the machine does not isolate man from the great problems of nature, but plunges him or her more deeply into them. And that's very, very relevant to renewables. So just a quick overview. First of all, how do we get electricity from renewables? Solar, wind, wave, and tidal. And is storage essential? A lot of people talk about that. And I want to, at the end of my talk, show you the differences between developing countries and developed countries with regard to renewables, because there are different approaches. Okay, so let's get started. Just a simple comparison between the way we keep ourselves warm and organize our houses. This is a small house in Cambridge, 3 bedrooms, a small family would live here, and it would use, it's actually in Gwydir Street, and it would use maybe 5 kilowatt hours of electricity a day and 22 kilowatt hours of gas. Now, those units, kilowatt hours, we're going to talk about units in a moment, but that gives you a size of how much energy we use in a house. And here on the right is a tree, an oak tree. It's 100 years old, 12 meters in diameter at the top. And this receives insolation, radiation from the sun, and it converts solar energy into nutrition for the tree. And this tree receives about 900 kilowatt hours a day from the sun. Compare that with the figures of the house. And the tree photosynthesizes in the leaves, and the efficiency of photosynthesis is about 13–14%. So about 57 kilowatt hours a day grows this tree. It grows the roots, it grows the trunk, the boughs, and the leaves, but the leaves are what takes the energy from the sun. And this tree's perhaps a little bit bigger than the house, but you can see how efficiently a plant is converting solar energy for its own use. So let's go back to those units. I do this slide. Some people like this, but anyway, let's see where we get with it. First of all, energy, the units of energy. The actual physics unit of energy is the joule. It's a very tiny, tiny unit, the watt second. But for electrical engineers, it's too small. So we like the megawatt hour. This is a really nice big fat unit, and it's 3.6 gigajoules. And the advantage of the megawatt hour, it's about equivalent to a ton of the energy in a ton of oil. And I now need to move to an even bigger unit, the terawatt hour, the 1 terawatt hour. That's equal to 1 million tons of oil equivalent. And now this unit becomes helpful to us. The United Kingdom, its total electricity consumption is about, you can easily remember it, 365 days in a year. It's 365 terawatt hours, roughly. Changes from year to year, but about 365 terawatt hours of electricity is used in Britain in a year. All those houses. I now want to turn to power. Power is the rate of doing work. And this is very important for engineers because our machines are rated in power. And so we start off with the megawatt is the unit of power, and that's a megajoule per second, okay? But the megawatt's a bit too small, so we'll have to move to a bigger one, the terawatt, which is 10 to the 6 megawatts, a million megawatts. And the megawatt is a million watts. So the terawatt is a useful unit for us when we're looking at the world. So I want to think about a large 3,000 megawatt power station. Here's a picture of it. This is the last coal-fired power station in the United Kingdom, and it's 3,000 megawatts. It turns out 3,000 megawatts. It's mostly now burning wood chips. And this, if you translate that 3,000 megawatts into terawatts, it's 0.003 terawatts. The total world usage of electricity is about 6.1 terawatts. That is 2,000 power stations like this. Now, actually, there's a lot more than 2,000 power stations because many of them are much smaller than this. But now the next interesting thing is not all the power stations are working at the same time. So our actual world usage of electricity is 2.2 terawatts. It's not 6.1, it's 2.2. We've got 3 times the installed capacity to what we use, okay? But electricity isn't the only energy vector that we use. We burn wood, we burn camel droppings, we burn gas, we burn oil. The actual total world production from all fuels is 19 terawatts, okay? Now, there's a rather interesting ratio, the ratio of electric power to total power. And for the world, it's 2.2 over 19, which is about 1/9, is the average ratio, PE, of electrical to total power. Now, this figure is very useful. So depending on your country, you know, if you're in a developed country, the ratio will be higher than 1/9. If you're in a developing country, it will be lower than 1/9. I want to return to this. So if you could just remember that PE ratio. So let's now turn to the Earth and our energy sources. Our energy, the energy we use, comes from the universe. It actually comes from after the Big Bang. And for the Earth in particular, it's coming from the solar system, most especially from the sun. So we've actually got 3 sources of energy in the Earth. Some of the energy comes from when the Milky Way was created. There was a supernova explosion, and debris from that explosion formed the Milky Way and the solar system. So these are the heavy elements that are embedded in the Earth: uranium, thorium, things that we've using now for nuclear power. These came from the supernova formation of the Milky Way. The next source of energy is prior organic matter on Earth, plants, trees, animals. And that's been folded or layered into the Earth's crust, or the top level of the Earth's crust. So we've got coal, which is from plants. Oil and gas mainly comes from marine animals. So that energy is inside the Earth. And then lastly, we've got the total power flux coming from the sun, the insolation, the solar radiation. And that is 89,300 terawatts. I'm telling you that enormous number, and I did all that stuff about the units so that you can see the world is using 2.9 terawatts of electricity, and 89,300 terawatts is coming in all the time from the sun. And it's creating life on Earth, and we are part of that. And we could extract energy from that 89,300, and we estimate we could recover maybe 7,500 in solar energy, 14 terawatts in wind. Now, because the number 14 is small, don't think 14 terawatts is small. A terawatt is a huge unit. and then wave power, which is the surface of the sea being changed by the climate, by winds, we could probably recover 0.6 of a terawatt. Lastly, this is not associated directly with solar energy, but with the sun, the earth, and the moon have a gravitational pull effect on one another, and that is raising and lowering the surface of oceans close to land, and we can extract energy from there. And we think we can extract about 0.2 terawatts. So you see there's 7,500 from solar, 14 terawatts from wind, 0.6 from wave, 0.2 from tidal. And I've done a little sum here to show you our demand, electrical demand, is 2.2 terawatts. So can we get that from renewables? Well, clearly the answer is yes. So now I want to turn to the greenhouse gas problem, but not only that, but also the issue about ice caps. So the first picture, this is just symbolic really. We've been burning fuels industrially for maybe 400 or 500 years, and that has released CO2 into the atmosphere, and it's a problem and it's an issue. But we're not the only polluters. This is a photograph of Mount St. Helens erupting in 1980. This eruption went on for many days, and enormous quantities of CO2 and other material was ejected, probably hundreds and hundreds of times the pollution of the whole of Earth's industry during that year. Many, many years worth of pollution came out of the volcano. But of course the volcano ejects material that's useful, minerals which make the surrounding countryside fertile after it has recovered. So we're not the only polluters. My last picture here really comes from Professor Sir David King, emphasizing the importance to us of our polluting, but also the effect on the ice caps. And he tells us that there are three major ice caps: the Arctic ice cap, which is floating, the Greenland ice cap, and the Antarctic ice cap. And he's saying that the Arctic ice cap is really very, very small now. And that means that the surface of the ocean is exposed directly to the sun. The ocean is blue and it absorbs energy. So there's heating up going on because of the loss of the losing of the Arctic ice cap. So these ice caps are very precious for us. Okay, moving on. I now want to change gear from the problem, the units, and I want to now change to understand electricity. How can we use electricity to become less carbon intensive? And first of all, I want to talk to you about the grid, the electrical system. And I'm showing you a map of Europe. I'm not showing you about other parts of the world, and I apologize for that, but just to concentrate your minds on the idea of electricity. We in Europe use 50-cycle electricity. It's alternating electricity. That's very valuable to us because it means we can change the voltage and we can transmit energy over very, very long distances. And we can transmit it all around a country. Now, we're all 50 hertz in Europe and in North Africa, but we're not all synchronized to one another. You'll see, it's obvious really, Great Britain has 50 hertz, and Ireland has 50 hertz, but we're not actually synchronized with one another. We're joined to one another electrically, but we're not joined by AC, we're joined by DC cables. Also, if you take the main part of Europe from Portugal right the way over to Greece and then into Turkey, they are all synchronized at 50 cycles, all of them, and North Africa, all synchronized at the same time. Scandinavia is actually on a separate 50 hertz up here, and you'll notice that Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are also on a separate system. Why? Because they're connected to the Russian system, which is 50 hertz, but it's not synchronized with Europe. So I'm showing you that there are these different systems, but they are all interconnected. Here are the interconnectors, and these are all DC coupling between slightly different AC systems, okay? And this is very, very important for renewables. Actually, the technology was really developed in Scandinavia. So you can see a lot of links around Scandinavia, but you see there are lots of links to us. The red ones are existing links. The green ones are ones that are being built now. And the blue ones are ones that are being planned. So you can see there's a very big one being planned from Greece down to Cyprus and to Israel and then down to Egypt. So you can see how we are interconnected, and that's a very important thing, piece of technology that's happened in the last 50 years in my lifetime. Okay, how do we balance these AC grids? This is a bit technical, I apologize for that, but I think you need to know about it. We balance our grids with slow manual control that's largely done by telephone, radio, and computers. And there are internationally agreed standards and procedures for doing it, right the way across Europe, from Ireland and Portugal, right the way across to Turkey and Russia. And we can switch circuits using circuit breakers, basically like your light switch. But we also control what we call dispatchable power stations. So we can tell a power station to increase power or reduce power. That's the slow control. But we also have automatic, fast control. The voltage is maintained on every generator that controls its voltage, so it's exactly what the grid requires. And every generator's frequency, to get the 50 hertz, it's controlled by a governor that automatically does it. And this is very fast. It acts very, very quickly. Now, that balance process has changed over the last 20 years. It's changed because of a number of technologies. One, renewables. Two, all these interconnectors I showed you. And also by internationalization of the grids and their communication. So let's see some of that. Now I want to go to what the problem that people thought renewables would be. This is the problem. It was considered a problem actually early in the 2000s because of the variability of renewables. And I'm showing here a graph of the whole of Europe's electricity demand, and that's in yellow, for 7 days. So you can see 7 days here. I can tell this is Saturday and this is Sunday because the demand is lower. So for 7 days, that's what customers were taking out of the electricity grid. And this is the wind that was blowing. The green is the wind that was blowing in Europe and supplying electricity. And it's varying. The beginning of the week is it's windy. This is a storm. But then later in the week, the wind declined. It was actually quite quiet. And then a big storm at the end of the week. So lots of people said, oh, this renewables is a problem because we can't absorb it in the grid. So the third graph in orange is the difference between the yellow and the green. And people said at that time, this diagram comes from a paper, oh, we've got smaller peaks, shorter peaks, steeper ramps, and we've got lower turn down. All of these things that people said, oh, these will be difficult to manage. Therefore, renewables are difficult. And there was a lot of talk back in those days saying, oh, how will we absorb it? Well, actually, I want now to switch to how do we absorb it? We use the electrical grid. This is the electric grid, the actual full map of the grid for the whole of Europe. It's quite surprising, isn't it? Right the way from Ireland and Portugal, down through North Africa, right the way across to Turkey, to Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. It's all interconnected. It's either interconnected AC or it's coupled together with these HVDC connections, and it is cooperating with one another. this is organized by, some people often ask me, is this the EU? No, it's an organization called ENTSO-E, which is a European collaboration. All the countries in that map are part of that cooperation. So let's now look at what European power is. I couldn't get today's power, but I got a day last year, the 22nd of September 2020. And this is the generation, electrical generation for the whole of Europe. Not the EU, every country in Europe. You see all the countries named here. United Kingdom is in here. France is in here, Germany, Italy. And you see that the peak generation is about 370 gigawatts. And of that European generation, 139 gigawatts, you see the value of these units, 139 gigawatts is renewable. In other words, over a third of the electricity being generated is coming from renewables. And you can see the wind here. Okay, so I just want to now narrow down to the United Kingdom. This is the United Kingdom's graph. It's got a different scale. And you can see that the UK is generating 36 gigawatts of electricity on this day. It's about a tenth of the whole of Europe, okay? Our renewables is 15 gigawatts. It's more than a tenth. We have more renewables because we're an island, because we're surrounded by sea, really. And you can see our onshore and offshore wind is a larger proportion than Europe. And in this graph, you can see the different sources of energy. We've got 8 nuclear power stations, so we've got a significant amount of nuclear power. At any one time, 4 or 5 of those are running. We've got fossil fuels, which in Britain is almost entirely gas-fired turbines. We've got all of these other ones are renewables. We've got biomass down the bottom, hydro, not a lot of hydro, photovoltaic. Can you see the photovoltaic starting in the morning, through the day, and expiring in the evening, and wind? So the difference between the problem issues that were thought to be around in the early 2000s and now is that we're dealing with it. Renewables is on a large scale already, and we're handling it. So how the solution is that we're handling renewables by measuring the frequency, controlling our sources of energy, and by interconnection. And this is a detailed slide on that, but I think I'll just skip over it. But I want to show you how we manage it. And this is how the UK manages its grid. This is a photograph taken in our grid control room for Great Britain. And these 2 gentlemen are on duty running the grid. This guy is in charge. He's the shift charge engineer. And this gentleman is dealing with a part of the grid. I want you to look behind them. There is this big network diagram. This is the whole of the electrical grid for UK. I mean, our grid is relatively small, say, compared to Japan, or compared to the United States, or compared to China. But we can show it on one big screen, okay? And over here is a map showing Great Britain and the power flow. You can't read the number at the top there, but the green at the top there is telling me the generation, and I can read it, and it's 39,000 megawatts, 39 gigawatts is being generated. But underneath in green, I think you can possibly read that, the demand is 40,000 gigawatts. 40,000 megawatts. So the demand is bigger than the generation. So underneath you can see it says transfer 1,456. Where's that transfer coming? Well, you can see it coming in from France, in from the Netherlands, and actually something's going out to Northern Ireland. And I want you to see on this map, this is Scotland. So Scotland is a net exporter. It's exporting electricity to Northern England, it's exporting electricity to Northern Ireland. And then the north of England is consuming electricity, but it's also exporting to southern England. And you can see that import into southern England feeding London and the southeast of England. But you can also see the Netherlands is supplying, and you can see France is supplying. Now, what's going on between the shift charge engineer and this gentleman, this guy, he's looking after this part of Britain. And he's got a frequency issue. And he's talking to his boss, what do I need to do? And the guy's telling him, you need to increase generation at this power station and that power station, and you need to talk to France, EDF, and see if they can raise their generation so that you can solve this problem. So this is how we manage the grid. Okay, so distributed renewable energy, what's it going to look like? For us in Britain, it's going to be lots of big, perhaps floating wind turbines. This is showing a mock-up of what the future might be with big wind turbines and possibly with wave devices together. A big distributed power station, not onshore, offshore. And that's possible for us and for Great Britain and Ireland because we're islands. That's what it's going to look like. But now I want to go back. Do you remember I spoke to you about this figure PE, which is the proportion of power used between electricity and all power sources in a country, which is an indicator of economic development. And I want to talk to you about variable renewables in Africa and the use of the electrical grid. My wife and I both worked in West Africa, so we got some idea of the difficulties that there are. But I want to show you some figures, first of all. The UK, we have a population of 72 million and an installed electrical capacity of 65 gigawatts. If we look at Africa, it has a population of 1,216 million, and it has installed capacity of 70 gigawatts. It's just a little bit bigger than Britain. So that's for the whole of Africa. So its PE is quite low, 1/12. But interestingly, in Africa, one country, South Africa, has 25 gigawatts. And another country has 10 gigawatts. That's 35 gigawatts in total. So South Africa and Egypt together have half the generation capacity of Africa. Why is that? It's development. It's a stage of development. We'll see that. Here's a map of the grid, electric grid in Africa. And you can see the grid is good in Egypt and in North Africa. It's good. And it's very developed in Southern Africa. But in Central Africa, it's difficult. Why? Because it's very, very costly capital which governments don't have to invest. They would have to borrow, and that's a problem for them. But one thing that Africa does have, it has fabulous insulation, irradiation. So you can see it's not just in North Africa and the Sahara. It has excellent insulation there where populations are quite high. It has excellent insulation in Southern Africa and in Central Africa. But you can see in Central Africa, there's almost no grid at all. So is there a solution for that? Is there something clever we can do? And I think the answer is yes. And I've taken information from a Cambridge company called Azuri, who I saw a presentation from them, and this is very interesting. They are trying to invest in, particularly in East Africa, but also starting in West Africa, in using PV and selling PV systems, or really renting PV systems for small homes and communities. So their technician here is installing a PV panel, and their product is a PV panel, a controller that you can do settings to, with a battery, a lithium-ion battery in there, and that lithium-ion battery can power LED lights, very strong, powerful lights, lighting is very, very important for families in Africa. I mean, the sun rises at 6 a.m. in the morning, it goes down at 6 p.m. in the evening, and children, when they want to study, they need lights. I mean, in the old days, it used to be paraffin lamps, and then later electric torches and things like that. But the batteries are pretty poor. Now with lithium ion and PV, we can give them very high levels of lighting from these LED lights. But I want to show you two customers for the Azuri product. This is a couple in Kenya, husband and wife, and they run a shop. They have a larger panel than that, probably a panel about that big. They have a bigger controller with a bigger battery, and that is powering their computer. They're running their business off a computer and using a mobile phone, which they can charge. So the computer can be charged from that charger, and they've got a very good LED light system so that mother and father can work at night sorting out the accounts. They don't have to pay outright for this whole system. They pay a monthly charge. And the Azuri has allowances when months are difficult that you can move the debt forward a bit. But here's another customer of Azuri. This young man, he's got a bigger system. He's probably got a bigger PV cell than this one on the roof of his house. And here's his controller, like this thing here. And this is big enough to power a television, a digital television. And he is selling, he's put the television in his house, and people can pay and watch telly, watch football of an evening. And the television is picking up signals from the Wi-Fi. He's also got outlets on his device so that he can charge mobile phones. And he's charging customers to charge their phones. So he's paying a rental for his equipment, but then he's getting an income from that equipment. In other words, they're bypassing the electric grid. They're using the insulation from the sun, and they're using Wi-Fi from mobile phones and for digital data, and that's how they're getting around it. So my conclusions are: renewable energy works for high PE countries like UK. And in 2020, we produced 10 to 35% of our electricity was from renewables. We have great potential on these islands, Ireland and Great Britain. So we've got open space, wind, sun and tide. So renewables will work. Will renewable energy expand? Yes, because it's getting cheaper. In Cambridge, there are some people who are very negative about renewables. I get a bit fed up with them. Love it or hate it, it's here to stay. By 2030, renewable energy will make at least 45 to 65% of UK's electricity. So that's going, and this is what's coming. People say renewables is hard to absorb, and they talk a lot about batteries. And that may be relevant in Central Africa, but it's not in Europe. They're not essential because of the grid and the energy stores that are already available in the grid. We've got a lot of hydro plant and pump storage, which is a store. We've got inter-country electric grid interconnectors incorporating storage. And we've got international markets that stimulate innovation, integrated grids and energy transfer. So batteries are not necessary or essential for renewables as in a developed grid installed system. However, renewable energy can work in low PE countries like Africa by bypassing the electric grid using low power PV, small lithium ion batteries in that yellow pack, the Azuri pack, and the Wi-Fi grid, see the Azuri product. So those are my conclusions, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to the questions. Thank you.